At that time, I had already told her that I had not been hypnotized and that I had been dishonest with her.
The story of Susan Nason is one of the most haunting and tragic cases.
She initially said that this recollection came to her in a flash when she was hypnotized by a therapist. She then had a talk with her mother, who had become an attorney.
In American true crime history, it is a story that begins in the 1960s with the disappearance of an innocent young girl and stretches across decades before justice is finally found. This case, known as the Susan Nason murder, is not only disturbing because of the crime itself, but also because of how long it remained unsolved. It is a story of memory, trauma, buried secrets, and the extraordinary way in which the past can rise to the surface when least expected. The series titled Buried takes its name from the idea that sometimes, in order to uncover truth, investigators must sift through layers of time, denial, and forgotten memories. On September 22, 1969, 8-year-old Susan Nason was reported missing in Foster City, California. Susan was a cheerful, friendly, and trusting child. She lived in a suburban community where children often played freely in their neighborhoods. That afternoon, Susan left school and was last seen walking toward the home of a friend. Her disappearance sent immediate shockwaves through the small community. In an era before modern technology, before Amber Alerts, and before national media attention could spread instantly, the investigation was slow and heavily reliant on door-to-door searches and eyewitness accounts. 2 days later, the heartbreaking truth came to light. Susan's body was discovered in a ravine near Crystal Springs Reservoir. She had been sexually assaulted and brutally murdered. The details of the crime shocked everyone. How could something so horrific happen to a child in a seemingly safe suburban neighborhood? Investigators launched a massive search for the killer, but the evidence was thin. Forensic science in 1969 was nowhere near the advanced state it is today. There were no DNA databases, no digital records, and very limited forensic tools. The case quickly grew cold. For years, Susan's murder remained unsolved. The community moved on, but for her family, the loss was a wound that never healed. Parents kept a closer watch on their children, neighbors whispered about potential suspects, and detectives who had worked the case never truly forgot it. But without leads, it seemed the case might never be solved. Susan's killer appeared to have gotten away with the crime. Then, in the 1980s, something remarkable happened. A woman named Eileen Franklin came forward with a shocking revelation. Eileen had grown up in the same neighborhood as Susan. In fact, Susan had been one of her childhood friends. Eileen claimed that after years of repressing memories, she suddenly remembered witnessing her father, George Franklin, murder Susan in 1969. According to Eileen, the memory returned to her spontaneously while she was playing with her own daughter. She described vivid details of the crime, details that investigators believed only someone present at the scene could know. This revelation stunned the public and reopened the cold case. Prosecutors now had to suspect George Franklin, Eileen's father. In 1990, more than 20 years after Susan's murder, George Franklin was arrested and charged. The case against him was extraordinary, not only because of the crime itself, but because it relied almost entirely on recovered memory testimony. This was groundbreaking and controversial. Could a repressed memory, recalled decades later, be reliable evidence in a murder trial? The trial of George Franklin became one of the most widely discussed and debated cases of the early 1990s. The prosecution argued that Eileen's memories were clear, specific, and credible. She remembered the location of the body, the injuries Susan had suffered, and the way her father had killed her. These details seemed to match the evidence from the 1969 investigation. The defense, however, argued that repressed memory was not a scientifically proven phenomenon and that Eileen's memories could have been influenced by media reports, suggestion, or even fabrication. The courtroom was filled with tension as Eileen testified against her father. It was a dramatic and deeply emotional moment. A daughter was accusing her own father of murdering her childhood. In 1990, George Franklin was convicted of Susan Nason's murder. The jury believed Eileen's testimony, and he was sentenced to life in prison. For Susan's family, this was a long-awaited moment of justice. After 2 decades of uncertainty, the person responsible for Susan's death had been held accountable. But the conviction was not the end of the story. As years passed, the Franklin case continued to spark debate. Critics argued that the reliance on repressed memory was flawed. Psychologists and legal experts questioned whether such memories could be trusted in a court of law. The science of memory was complex, and many argued that human recollections, especially of traumatic events from childhood, were highly susceptible to distortion. By the mid-1990s, the conversation around repressed memory had shifted significantly, and the Franklin conviction was placed under increasing scrutiny. In 1995, an appeals court overturned George Franklin's conviction. The court ruled that his trial had been unfair, citing both legal errors and the questionable reliability of repressed memory testimony. Franklin was released from prison after serving only 6 years. For Susan's family, this was another devastating blow. They had believed that justice had finally been served, only to watch the conviction unravel. For Eileen, it was a personal tragedy as well. She had testified against her own father, believing in the truth of her memories, only to see the legal system cast them aside. The Susan Nason case remains one of the most controversial examples of repressed memory testimony in American legal history. It raised difficult questions about justice, memory, and the reliability of human perception. Some believed George Franklin was guilty and that Eileen's memories were accurate. Others argue that the case was built on shaky ground and that an innocent man may have been wrongfully convicted. To this day, opinions remain divided. What is undeniable, however, is the tragedy at the heart of the story. Susan Nason, a vibrant 8-year-old girl, was brutally murdered, and her case has never been truly resolved. While George Franklin was once convicted, his release meant that legally, Susan's murder is unsolved. For her family, that lack of closure is unbearable. For the community, the case serves as a haunting reminder of how fragile justice can be. The series Buried explores this story not only as a murder case, but also as a psychological and cultural phenomenon. Should a memory, no matter how vivid, be enough to convict someone of murder? And what does justice mean when the truth remains buried in uncertainty? Susan's story also reflects broader issues in true crime history. It shows how limitations in forensic science can leave cases cold for years, how family secrets can hide in plain sight, and how the legal system must constantly grapple with new scientific and psychological concepts. The Nason case is not only about one child's tragic death, but also about how society responds to the mysteries of memory and trauma. For Susan's family, the pain endures. They lost a beloved daughter and never truly received lasting justice. For Eileen Franklin, the case remains one of the most controversial acts of testimony in modern American history. She placed her father in prison, based on her recovered memories, only to see the conviction erased. For George Franklin, the case destroyed his reputation, his relationships, and his freedom, even after his release. Every person involved in this case was forever changed. The series premiere of Buried revisits this haunting case with a sense of gravity and care. It is not simply about retelling the crime, but about exploring the deeper human questions it raises. Why do some memories stay vivid while others vanish? Can trauma truly lock memories away for decades? And how should the legal system treat such testimony? These are questions with no easy answers, but they are essential for anyone who seeks to understand the intersection of crime, psychology, and justice. In the end, the murder of Susan Nason is a story of tragedy, controversy, and unresolved pain. It is a story that forces us to confront the limits of human memory and the imperfections of justice. Buried, as a series, seeks to uncover not only the facts of the case, justice, and how we cope with the wounds that time never fully heals,